All right, I'm Jim Lindorf. This is Lonesome Lands Podcast, and I'm here with Kevin Virgil. And just give you a little background of how when I started Lonesome Lands as a website, and I started writing things about in 2017. And at the time, one of the first things I wrote was the About Us page. And what I put in there was I'm not going to get into politics. there's enough people talking about politics, and you know, it brings up just feelings, I guess. Or you say the word Republican. I always said I wasn't going to write Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal, just because those words just bring up, you know, they instantly make your mind go places. But a lot's changed since 2017, I guess, and you know, now here we are, and I've talked a lot about different issues, and so I think it's a good idea to maybe bring in someone who's into politics that is into these same issues. And so it's Kevin Virgil, and he is running for House of Representatives in my district, the Western District of Iowa, against, you're running the primary campaign against Randy Feenstra, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so if you just want to, who are you and how in the hell did you get into politics, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate your comments about wanting to avoid politics. Look, I've never been in politics before this. I like to joke with people on the campaign trail that the last political office I held was on high school student council, and unfortunately, I think our way of government, our way of life here is such in America today. We've allowed the government to become such a massive force in our lives over the last, say, 30, 40, 50 years that, you know, we can't avoid talking about government because it controls so much of what we do, you know, in business and in our private life. It's got an unprecedented amount or degree of control over all of us at this point. It's hard to avoid. That's really a big part of why I got into politics, but to roll that back rather. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Northwest Iowa in O'Brien County, sort of like in a small town. I don't know, for your listeners up around there, maybe about an hour's drive east and a little bit north of Sioux City, right? So I graduated from high school in the early 90s and went to West Point after high school. Wanted to see the world. That seemed the right way to do it. So I joined the Army and served for a few years. Left the Army in the late 90s. Took a job. I found the opportunity to take a job in New York, and I was working there, and left that job just shortly before 9/11. And I would have been working I worked across the street from the World Trade Center, so that all that work I was doing seemed kind of hollow after that. And I thought about getting back into service again for a second time, and that I had an opportunity to join the CIA, and served with them for overseas for a few years, and left government service for a second time, and then ultimately, you know, as one does, met a girl, started a family, then started a business, which I've been running for most of the past 10 years, and ultimately have always maintained really close ties with my family and friends and neighbors back here in Iowa. I bring my kids back here whenever I can. You know, they love coming to my parents' farm, which, you know, my dad still owns. And really learning about a lot of the things that were happening here locally, you know, some of the, you know, just the problems and the political corruption we're dealing with here in Iowa is what, when compounded by everything that's happening at the national level now that everybody's aware of, is what persuaded me to run for office.
Mm-hmm. And what business? You said you started a business. You've been running for 10 years now. Yeah,
that's right. So the company's called Polycentury. It's a software developer. So we started out selling security analysis software, mostly for security teams. Our first big customer was a large hotel chain, but then we ended up finding an opportunity to sell our product to the federal government as well, primarily to the military, and very specifically to the Air Force. So we ended up, I mean, never thought I'd become a defense contractor, but I guess that's what I've been for much of the last few years.
Oh, boy. So you talk about the corruption. I guess you've had a front row seat. Right?
Yeah, it's a widely held belief in the defense contracting world that you could fire half of the civilian workforce and probably half of the military, like the uniformed personnel at a DOD, and that organization would almost certainly run better than it runs today. Just rampant waste and misuse of taxpayer funds across the board, 100%. So yeah, having worked inside the bureaucracy, first as a soldier and an officer, and then as with the intelligence community, and then trying to sell to the machine as a business owner is definitely changed my way of thinking about how the government operates, or rather how it doesn't.
Okay. So you never had political aspirations?
Never.
Until when would you say you had them?
If you had told me a year ago today that we'd be having this conversation, I would have laughed at you.
Really?
Yeah, no, I had never thought about doing this. And, my opponent, tries to attack me because he claims I'm not really from Iowa, because even though I grew up here, right, I left after high school to go serve. But, even up until 6 months ago, I was living outside the state, right? I was living on the East Coast. And again, I think the issue that persuaded me to get involved in state level politics and ultimately to run for Congress here was the efforts by companies that are trying to build carbon capture pipelines here in the upper Midwest, right? Iowa, well, most notably Iowa and the two Dakotas. But efforts by these companies, which are extremely politically well connected, to use eminent domain to legally seize land from farmers and from landowners here against their will, which, as your listeners will know, is doing that, taking land from another private citizen for the gain of another private company. It's unconstitutional as per the Fifth Amendment, right, which prohibits seizure of private land for the benefit of another private person or private entity. But it's also un-American, right? I mean, what's more American than property rights and protecting what you have? And that was how I first learned really about what this company was trying to do, this carbon capture pipeline company. But then also, I think, was what made me aware of our current congressman's voting record, right? Everything that he had done to facilitate this big land grab, by inserting tax credits into debt ceiling and spending bills that made it possible for the carbon capture pipelines to do what they're trying to do. And then as I dug deeper into our current congressman, Randy Feenstra's voting record, I just saw a pattern of somebody who was representing the interests of large out-of-state donors, repeatedly voting to further enable the power and the reach of the federal government at the expense of the people. And that's not, I know Iowa very well, having grown up here, and I know that this is not what the people here in Western Iowa want, right? This is one of the more conservative districts in the country. Certainly the most conservative in Iowa, and people don't want that. They want limited government. They want property rights. They want to be left alone. They don't want this. Like 4 out of 5 Iowans responded to a Des Moines Register poll last year, stating that they were opposed to the use of eminent domain for this carbon capture pipeline. We're not talking about building an interstate highway or a school or something that has clear public benefit, right? It's not educating our kids or getting people to work faster. This is just helping people who are already rich to become a lot more wealthy by taking tax credits, which, as you very well know, is just extracting money out of our pockets and redistributing it to the politically connected few. It's a huge scam. Our current congressman enabled it, and I thought that was wrong. So when coupled with the other things he's voted for and has not voted for, that's what I decided to run against him.
Mm-hmm. So how did he enable it? I've been all into this. I've talked a lot about South Dakota and I've had multiple guests on from South Dakota because
Sure.
That's where the eminent domain lawsuits are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are we looking at in Iowa? Where are we at compared, I guess, to them? And
ironically, I first heard about this in South Dakota. Right there, you may have heard about this this farmer up there named Jared Bosley,
mm-hmm.
who's
Trent Lewis. We had him on, and he told me that's somebody I should talk to. I think that was on the podcast when he was starting to talk about it.
I first heard about this. My dad had forwarded me this article about this guy up in South Dakota, Bosley. He'd been opposed to the pipeline using his land. He was in the intended path. He'd been fighting it tooth and nail, and then Summit went out and got a court order from, I think it was a county judge, to allow them to come onto his land with a court order, with sheriffs in tow, to survey his land. They waited till he was gone, and they knew he'd left the property. Then they went on there when his wife was there alone, scared the heck out of her.
And they were all armed, right?
Oh, they were all armed. Yeah, just the very, very overbearing, very threatening. Just ridiculous. It's like something out of a bad 80s movie, right?
Yeah, so that's where I first probably heard about it too. I saw the pictures.
Yeah.
Like they were going into his buildings. Like
it was just
had nothing to do with pipeline.
No, it was just a show of force, right? It was a power grab. They were trying to intimidate him and the other landowners. It clearly didn't work. And then I remember it was last summer. I just tuned in to watch this. It was a protest at the state capitol in South Dakota. Maybe 400 or 500 farmers and ranchers showed up, and in South Dakota, when you got 500 people anywhere in the same location, that's a crowd, right?
Yeah.
And they were really upset. So I thought this is something worth tuning into. So when I was back here with my kids, I came back here for like a few weeks over the summer and started to tune into it. And the more I heard about this, the more ridiculous it sounded. And this is how I got to know our former Congressman Steve King, who represented the 4th District for almost 20 years, right, from like 2002 to 2020. And he's become a single-issue voter fighting this land grab, this boondoggle that Summit is trying to make happen. And when I met him, I just saw that he was really leading the charge on it. I started asking, hey, what can I do to help, right? Can I help you raise money for legal defense? I ended up writing an article about it because that's how I wrap my head around a complicated issue.
Yeah.
And a version of the article was published in the Des Moines Register last year as an op-ed. So that put me on the radar with a few people, both positive and negative ways, depending on how you see the issue. And it wasn't long after that Congressman King asked me, hey, have you ever taken a close look at Randy Feenstra's voting record? So I started digging in. There are these groups out there, like the Republican Liberty Caucus, that issue a report card on every member of Congress in the Republican Party, a Republican member of Congress, and whether or not they vote with the Constitution. You get a perfect score of 100 if you always vote constitutionally, and a score of 0 if you don't. And Randy Feenstra, who represents one of the more conservative districts in this country, got a score of 50, which means you could flip a coin as to whether or not he's going to vote with the Constitution. So he's voted for everything from, he worked very hard to make this pipeline happen for his big donors. He's voted to allow the federal government to spy on you and your kids without a warrant. He's voted to restrict your speech and to allow the government to continue censoring speech. He's voted for just about every expansion of the federal budget. He repeatedly voted along with debt ceiling bills with the Biden administration, until I came along and decided to run a primary campaign against him. Then he suddenly got religion, as they say.
Yeah.
And I just saw we got somebody here who votes like a Democrat, but is in Iowa's 4th District. Doesn't make any sense to me. So I was waiting for somebody to run a primary against him. I thought it's got to happen, right? Everybody I talked to was unhappy with him, but it wasn't until mid-December of this last year that it was obvious to me that nobody else was going to stand up. So that's when I decided to.
Yeah, and everybody, you've been criticized. Well, you're out of state. You have brought that up. You're criticized that you're an out-of-state guy. But, we hear drain the swamp. Everybody wants to drain the swamp. But then when you get down to it, we keep electing the same people. Like if your guy's been in there, they just get reelected. And it doesn't make any sense to me. And that's why, that's mainly one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here, because the handful of politicians that I would really want to talk to are really, there's only a handful of them. And so I looked at what you were saying and what he has done. And you talked about that rating and the people like Thomas Massey, Harriet Hageman.
Yep.
Those are the kind of people that want to drain the swamp. Those are like the swamp drainers. And I see your kind of, your campaign is right along, kind of lines up with their ideology. And so that's why I thought it'd be good to have you on. And also I did a podcast, if you've been listening, with Brett Kenzie, where we talked about Sustains Act. And Randy Feenstra, you're much more familiar with his voting record than I am, but I know his name was a co-sponsor of the Sustains Act, and there wasn't that many. And if you haven't seen that episode, go back with Brett Kenzie. But it was the first part of a bill that ended up being part of an omnibus, but it was introduced by Dusty Johnson from South Dakota. And what it did was it allowed the climate smart commodity program, where corporations can invest in really the USDA and get grants back. For example, Tyson Foods has they wrote a check for I think $50 or $60 million, and they got $150 million grant. That's the same thing. The Farm Journal has gotten a $40 million grant, and I'm into agriculture media, obviously, and on the cover of all these magazines is carbon capture, your carbon sequestration, all this crap, and it's all funded by the government and the corporations funding the government. And that's kind of a Feenstra's deal. So that's kind of where I started looking into you, and I was like, oh, good, we got a primary candidate, because most people in there don't get someone opposing them. It's like you said, someone's got to run, and everybody wants to drain the swamp, but nobody wants to run. And so I feel like when we actually do get somebody in there that has these ideas, that wants to run, we should get behind them. So I guess your thoughts on the whole drain the swamp thing. And as far as agriculture, like you've already got into it some, but I mean, that's where I'm at as far as, politics. Like, we just got to get who's in there and who's causing all these problems out.
Yeah, that's the core issue, right? Some people call it federal government reform. Some people refer to it as draining the swamp. It's the same goal, which is to reduce the budget, the power, the influence of our federal government, right? If you look at what Article 1 of the Constitution says, or the specifically enumerated powers of the federal government, it's not a very long list, right? It's coining money, it's defending our border, neither of which the federal government's doing very well right now, but it still taxes us anywhere from 20 to 40%, almost 40% of our income. That's even before the states and our municipalities take a bite, or our counties, which are property taxes. And they're not providing any meaningful service, yet the amount of power they have over us today in 2024, thanks to collusion with big tech, big pharma, all of these huge corporate interests, like Tyson Foods, which is slowly poisoning our people and our kids, while enabling the illegal immigrant invasion. I'm no fan of Tyson Foods, by the way. We can talk about that too if you want. But I think it's draining the swamp. To me, it isn't just cutting headcount and budget, which I'm very much in favor of, but it's in severing the ties between those corporate interests. Some people call it corporate capture, and the federal government, right? Using those connections, like you said, writing a $40 million check to get a $150 million grant. That's a pretty insane return on investment when you think about it, right? I mean, I wish I could make trades in the market like that company did.
Gives them, like, if you look at the article Tyson wrote, they're shaking hands with Tom Vilsack. It gives them this bureaucracy, and it gives them an inside set. Like, they're working with the USDA, and so then when you go back and look at how we've wanted the USDA to do, small farmers and ranchers have wanted the USDA to, when I got into this thing, it was Packers Stockyards Act, cattle market reform, different things like that. But when you come down to it, they're partnered with the corporations.
Yeah, let me tell you something about Tyson Foods, right? It's no friend of Iowa or of the people. So Tyson, one of the largest food producers in the United States, right? They've got a bunch of brands that are basically just processed garbage. That are meaningfully contributing to the obesity crisis. But they just laid off 1,200 workers down in Perry, and not in my congressional district, but had an impact on the state economy when they laid off 1,200 workers in Perry, which is is a town that's already been pretty hard hit. They had that mass shooter a few months ago. Mm-hmm. This town of 7,000 people that just lost 1,200 jobs. That's the sort of thing that can kill a town. And they did that. Tyson did that the same day they let off workers in 5 other states as well. And I'm not making this up. You can find the Bloomberg article where Tyson's CFO was on record as stating that they are basically moving those jobs to New York State because they want to hire 40,000 illegal immigrants as part of their so-called ESG initiative. So here we have a company, obviously politically well-connected, that wants to lay off people who have the legal right to work here, either American citizens or green card workers, Let's assume that's what everybody in Tyson had one or the other of that status, and they're hiring illegal aliens in a state that's aiding and abetting in the invasion of illegal aliens in this country, which I can tell you firsthand after being to all 36 counties in this district is the number one issue that people care about right now is the border and the illegal alien invasion. So Tyson is openly flouting American law while glad-handing officials through his army of lobbyists up on Capitol Hill and in Des Moines to basically improve their profit margins by laying off U.S. citizens to hire illegals. And I think it's wrong. One
of the ways I first saw you is Vivek Ramaswamy endorsed you. And I've covered him some because I really liked what he said. And you've already kind of gotten around to talking about Department of Defense and how, the reason I liked him is because he talked about the chainsaw. The only way to fix the federal government is to take a chainsaw to it. And we talk about draining the swamp. But, we've been told forever, and you get into the Republican Party, even if you voted Republican or Democrat, I'm 45 years old. And as my whole life I've been told, you vote Republican, we're going to make government smaller, we're going to cut spending, all this stuff for years and years and years. And if you voted Democrat, they said they're going to decrease the wealth gap and decrease poverty and all these things, and none of that ever happens. They just keep spending more and more money. But we've also heard that we can't keep spending like this. But we seem like we have, and we've survived. How much longer do we really have? And if you want to comment on that chainsaw approach, how does that look, I guess?
Well, I think a great example, and there's a literal example of this playing out right now down in the southern hemisphere right now with Argentina, right? So Milei is the new president down there. Argentina is a country that's gone through, it basically, it was basically destroyed over the last 60 or 70 years. At one point, Argentina was more prosperous than most European countries, until maybe in the 1920s or 30s. Then the Peronists, this leftist political family and a following took over and basically just ran the country and its economy into the ground, right? And they've defaulted on their all of their loans to the World Bank and to the international markets many times. Argentina's become a punchline on how to destroy a country's economy. So Milei comes in last year, basically promises to cut the federal government I think he said by 75%. Exactly what he did. And he used to campaign with the chainsaw. He'd run around, talk about how he was going to basically just cut all these federal agencies, and he's doing it. He laid off over half the federal workforce in his first month in office. He's balanced the budget, right? This is a country that hasn't had a balanced budget since well before the first computer was invented, right? It's remarkable what he's doing. And it's causing a lot of short-term pain. I'm not going to lie about that. But we are on the same path right now that Argentina was before that. And they had to go through 6 or 7 decades of pain before Milei came along. And the answer to your question about how long we can continue this, we can continue to print money with abandon and just and act like complete fools, economic and fiscal fools, as long as the international markets allow us to. And as long as the dollar is the global reserve currency and there's a buyer for every dollar that our Federal Reserve prints, we could continue doing it. But the day that the markets decide to stop accepting dollars at whatever price we offer them is the day this all comes to a screeching halt, and we're going to be in a world of hurt. And you're already seeing signs that that's beginning to happen, right? The Saudis are no longer accepting dollars exclusively when they're selling their oil. More and more countries are now using the Chinese yuan or the renminbi as their settlement currency for a lot of their purchasing they make for Chinese goods and services. It's starting to happen. The dollar doesn't have the hegemony that it had, even 5 years ago. And that's this isn't going to happen linearly. It's going to be an exponential rate of deterioration, and it's going to really hurt. So Yeah, I think unless we start to make real serious and biting changes now, and it's probably going to involve some pain. The longer we put it off, the more it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and I feel like out here too. I was just thinking as you were talking about Argentina. It's like, well, we do see videos from these big cities where it looks like a third world country. I mean, there are neighborhoods where it seems like we're almost already there with the drug use and all that
Absolutely.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, in New York City.
Yeah.
Or DC.
Right. Yeah, which, I mean, we're insulated here, but, it's kind of like it's creeping its way through. And, you hear about all these immigrants shipped all over the place that have no, it's all federal. They're all federally funded.
Right. Look, I mean, it's happening right here in front of us, right? Like the small town I grew up in, or grew up just outside, has roughly 40% of the population it had 30 years ago. I would say just my back of the envelope guess is 1 out of 3 houses or dwellings in that town probably need to be condemned and knocked down now. I don't think it's unique to my small town either. It's there's been a real deterioration in the quality of life right here in small town Iowa, and that's because there's been such significant wage compression in the middle class, loss of opportunity. And then that's a reflection of bad government. Like this, like what you were saying earlier about this belief that Republicans stand for limited government and Democrats stand for expansion of the government's role in our lives. I don't think there's no longer a lot of distinction between those two parties at this point. It's really just the uniparty. But there are fringes of both parties that are trying to be true to what those parties used to be. Look, like a Kennedy Democrat would probably be like a fire-breathing conservative today, right? 60 years later, would be a lot more like the Masseys and the and the Bob Goods that we have in Congress today. But your average moderate Republican is, I don't see any distinction between that person and a socialist at this point.
Yeah.
Like what they say on the campaign trail or on Fox News is very different with how they vote, and I think it's disgraceful.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of was like, well, I'll go ahead and talk to you because, you see these votes they're more worried about foreign countries than they are our country. They refuse to do anything about the border, and they come out and they say, well, it's a huge problem. Like you just said, they all say the same thing. It's the biggest problem. And then they have these votes for these, trillions and billions, whatever you want, going overseas. It's just insane. But to get back to agriculture, I guess, what does... You said you grew up on a farm. Your parents and your parents' farm.
I'm a fifth generation Iowan. My dad still owns the farm that my great grandfather homesteaded back in the 1870s. And I'm gonna have to go back and listen to your episode where you were just talking with somebody about the cattle tracking initiative.
Right.
That earmark that was stuck through in an omnibus bill a couple of months ago that Feenstra voted for. I mean, to me. Yeah, I get suspicious whenever the government wants more information about any industry.
Right.
You're talking about, requiring mandatory RFID tracking on every head of cattle. My dad has 2 Jersey cows that he just has like a hobby, right? So he's got to put RFID tags on them, versus like the guy down the road who owns like 500 head. So I think about. Whenever there's a new government program like this in any industry, there's usually a cost of implementation that goes with that, right? And do you think that like the production facility that is going to process all these cattle and it's going to be, the government's going to basically use them as an outsourced enforcement mechanism, right?
Right. And that's the...
Right. So do you think they're going to absorb all those costs on their own out of the goodness of their hearts? No, they're going to pass it on to the producer.
Yeah.
Right. So that the guy who owns 500 head of cattle is going to be like, all right, well, I can suck this up. But my dad's an extreme example. He's got two Jersey cows, right? But he might just decide this just isn't worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah.
Right. With all these additional costs for government compliance I have to deal with right now.
Right.
So it's just another example of government trying to solve a problem and creating an even bigger one. I understand there's this problem right now with a lot of cattle coming in from like Uruguay or other countries, and people like illegally putting that "Made in the USA" stamp on those cattle, right? You probably hear about that a lot.
Product of the USA.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a real problem. But given the government, given the IRS, like even more transparency into somebody's private business that they could squeeze them. Given the government, even more ability, given the USDA more ability to find to create more regulations to make a producer's life miserable. That just doesn't sound like a good idea to me.
Yeah. And does that come from CIA?
No, that just comes from common sense.
Right,
I mean,
right. But
no.
as far as, there's been the CIA and FBI are in the news a lot, and they're raised a lot of eyebrows over the last few years.
Right.
And so you as an ex-CIA guy, and now running for office, and go back to Vivek's, his endorsement of you, he wanted to, I think, dissolve the CIA and the FBI.
I'm down with that.
What you think that would be a good idea as an ex-CIA?
Absolutely. I think that. Well, I think that there are. Both those organizations are supposed to serve valuable functions, right? The FBI was not initially created to be like our internal intelligence agency, right? Like, like trying to manufacture conspiracies of some poor hillbillies like trying to kidnap their governor or something, right? Where you had like three probably low IQ rednecks like conspiring with 15 undercover FBI agents who were basically entrapping them. Yeah. Right. That's like the worst example of what the FBI is doing. But the FBI was originally created because we needed a federal law enforcement agency to chase bank robbers, right? Pursue interstate, cross-state crime. The agency was created because we needed an intelligence collection capability, right? 80% of what we need to know about our foreign adversaries can be learned through diplomatic means or just through reading the newspaper. But there's that 20%. Of information we need to know that we have to find other means, right? And sometimes it's messy and dirty, and we need to keep it secret. But the problem with running like a secret agency like that is when you don't have any oversight, then you ultimately find that like the worst kind of people start wanting to work in those places and start acting far outside the remit, and you end up with something where we just had 51 former CIA leaders, senior leaders, signing an attestation that the Hunter Biden laptop was a hoax when in fact it was absolutely legitimate. They all lied. Yet you had people like Jim Clapper, who former director of national intelligence, who lied under oath to Congress, was never prosecuted for it. Jim Brennan, former head of the CIA, who quite literally voted for a candidate from the Communist Party of America for president back in the 70s. This guy was allowed to run the CIA. We have clearly lost our way, right? These organizations are completely broken. We're now seeing signs that they're being weaponized against the American people. And this as somebody, there's a reason I don't work there anymore, by the way. I was in long enough to understand that I did not want to make this a long-term career. I really enjoyed doing what I did. I'm very proud of what we did, with the wake of 9/11. But even back then, I think it wasn't until 2016 when President Trump was elected, and I think the deep state's brains just melted down, that they all really just started working at cross purposes with the American people. I think that's when they went from being, I think, maybe a liability to the American people to being like a full-on adversary, and I fully support them being shut down at this point. Let's just defund them, shut them down, and start them over.
Okay. So how did you, I guess, get back to in your personal? So you went out of college straight to West Point?
That's right.
Yeah. And you were in the Army for how long?
Yeah, so I graduated from West Point in 1995. Right, 4 years there. And then I was in the Army for 5 years after that. So I started out in the 82nd Airborne. Was there for a couple of years, then an opportunity to try out to join a unit called the Ranger Regiment. So I joined up with them, was there for another 3 years. And then that's when I left. after that.
To get back to agriculture, I guess, and one of the things I've seen is the discrepancy in fundraising. And you've talked about how Feenstra kind of goes along with who's paying him, and you brought up Summit. So can you want to talk a little? One of the reasons I wanted to have you too is like, I'm not going to talk to Randy Feenstra. He has however many millions of dollars he's gotten as far as campaign funds.
Sure.
And I think somebody should give you some place to say what you want to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, yeah, this gets back to your earlier question about why it's so hard to get bad politicians out of Congress, and it really is. It's a financially driven enterprise, right? Like the day that Feenstra was tapped on the shoulder to run against Steve King back in the 2020 election, the day he announced, right? He didn't step up on his own. He was basically tapped on the shoulder. But I think, as I recall, he had well over $1 million, maybe almost $2 million in his campaign bank account on day one, right? And when I announced that I was running at the end of 2023, he'd already had over $2 million in his campaign bank account and raised another $800,000 in the first quarter of this year. Meanwhile, I put in some money of my own, but I think I raised another like a little over $40,000 out of that. Right? You understand? Right? This really is David versus Goliath.
Yeah. And it's the machine versus
So my brother who works for a big bank is a bit of a data analytics ninja. So he started diving into because all the fundraising data, it's published by the federal government on this organization or this agency called the Federal Elections Commission. So you can see exactly who's donating to every politician, right? So we figured out that 97% of the money that Feenstra's campaign has raised came from outside of the 4th District. He only raised, of that $800,000 he raised in the first quarter of this year, only $22,000 came from inside the district. I actually raised more money for the district than he did. It's because 97% of it, most of it came from New York, D.C., Virginia, all these mega PACs, right? These special interest groups that want to keep him in the chair because, it's like he'll push whichever button they tell him to, as we can obviously see. And the reason that he doesn't show up for pre-announced town halls that are open to the public, right? The reason that he doesn't return people's phone calls when they call his office to ask him a question is because he's not working for them, right? He's working for whoever strokes those massive checks from whatever PAC, right? Or Chinese owned companies like Smithfield or Syngenta that have donated to him. He's not answering to Farmer Bob Jones,
right,
down in Crawford County, who might have given him like $50 at the latest fundraiser. But that's who's donating to me. And I guess that's the difference. And I think that's the reason I'm doing well. And even though he's got, quite literally like 20 times the money in his campaign bank account that I do, is because, this is still America and the voters still decide who gets elected, right?
Yeah.
And, those voters who are writing like, $50 checks or, the old lady's giving like a few crumpled up dollar bills to me at the the latest meet and greet. They want some change.
Right.
So that's it's tough, when it really is a David versus Goliath battle. This happens in every congressional district in America, which is why it's so hard to kick bad politicians out. But
right,
we got to try.
And it just seems like they've got him in there. They know he's going to do what they ask him to, and
like a sock puppet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And even one of the reasons I started looking into if he had an opponent and found you, I started, like I said, when I started doing this stuff, I wasn't into politics at all, and I was followed politics, but I wasn't. My goal wasn't to start interviewing politicians.
Sure. Hope not.
But
right.
Yeah. But then there was things that happened in the cattle industry with the Tyson Holcomb fire, and then COVID, and they had all these I don't know what you call them, Senate hearings. That's what you call them. And you know, they'd get guys. John Shaban from Dunlop, the auctioneer, he testified one time, and there's been other really good, Justin Tupper and Giles Stockton, and these people went and testified at all these different hearings, and I would watch them because I was interested and wanted to kind of let people know what was going on. And they were all, Randy Feenstra was one of them. I can remember him being like, "Oh, we're so glad you're here, and we can't wait to tackle this issue, and we're going to get to work on it right away." And they didn't do a single thing on it at all. It was just like, "Oh, that's great to hear from you. Thanks for coming."
Yeah.
And then, when they just went back and do what their donor, to collect the money
Sure.
from the donors, and now that when we get into this pipeline, and this, I guess, did you want to talk more about, who's kind of controlling that, and what has Feenstra done to enable that? You say he's enabled it, I guess.
Yeah, not just enabled, he's fought very hard to make it happen. I could talk about the pipeline all day long. So I think I mentioned that 4 out of 5 Iowans support the use of eminent domain
they're against eminent domain.
They oppose the use of eminent domain for this pipeline, right, in a Des Moines Register poll. Look, I've got no problem with anybody building a business, right? My opposition to this pipeline starts and ends with the use of eminent domain, which is unconstitutional and frankly un-American. And then whenever Feenstra is asked about this pipeline, he'll just try to fob it off and claim that it's a state issue. It's not a federal issue. That's a bald-faced lie. The whole reason this pipeline exists today is because he and the other 3 Iowa House Republicans in Congress worked hard to add billions of dollars of carbon capture tax credits to a federal spending bill last April. And what's crazy about this is those tax credits were added to a bill exactly 1 week after Feenstra received a $26,000 donation from Bruce Rastetter, the founder of Summit Carbon Solutions, who has quite a reputation here in Iowa, as you might expect, right? Is currently trying to build a corn-based ethanol industry in Brazil that'll compete directly with Iowa to tackle the sustainable aviation fuel market. This man is not a friend of Iowa's ethanol industry, as much as people might want to believe. Right. I mean, as much as people might want to claim that he is. Right. I think his track record shows that the truth is quite different. But no, this started at the federal level with those tax credits that the Congressional Budget Office estimates are worth around $38 billion. That's a massive grand prize for Summit to go pursue, right? So now you understand why they're fighting so hard to pursue eminent domain against all of the landowners that don't want this pipeline in their backyard, and they shouldn't want it in their backyard, right? There was another carbon capture pipeline built down in the Mississippi Delta. Right now, it was owned by a company called Denbury Resources that ruptured back in 2021, right? And when CO2 ruptures under pressure, right, it's liquefied, which, by the way, it takes an insane amount of water to like tens of millions of gallons of water to liquefy carbon dioxide at scale. So we can have a conversation about whether or not all that water out there in our aquifers, that the farmers are using is the highest and best use of that water, to allow Summit to make billions of dollars, or a lot of the farmers are going to be competing with that, to get access to that water for their wells. If this thing is built, nobody wants to talk about, or Summit doesn't want to talk about the water use requirements for this. But anyway, that carbon capture pipeline in Mississippi ruptured when it was under pressure, and it released a massive cloud of CO2 vapor into the air. And when CO2 is released under pressure like that, it's more dense than oxygen, so it just hangs out at the surface, right? If you get caught in that cloud, it's colorless and odorless. You don't see it coming, but you can't breathe if you're enveloped in it. You can't start your engine. Your internal combustion engine needs oxygen, so you're not going to go anywhere. So this descended on a small town called Satarsha in Mississippi, and it's a miracle nobody died. But obviously there was significant litigation after this all played out, and it will be for the next several years. But even with that, right, with all that litigation playing out, ExxonMobil still bought that carbon capture pipeline last year for $5 billion. This is critical infrastructure for the oil industry. The reason that this is being built, the reason that Continental Resources, which is the largest oil driller in operating in North Dakota, they invested $250 million in the summit a couple of years ago. It's not because they believe in the whole climate change scam. It's because when you take CO2 under pressure, right? When you inject CO2 along with the water that these oil companies use for fracking up there in the Bakken oil formation in North Dakota, you could extract 10 to 20% more oil than you can with water alone.
Right.
It's a process called enhanced oil recovery. It's currently the only real clear, like, marketable use for CO2. So, look, I think the way that Rastetter is building this pipeline, there's a reason they're going to terminate it up in North Dakota, right? It's they claim they're going to just bury it underground.
Yeah.
But that's and they'll do that, if the most money they can make is the $85 per metric ton that the federal government's going to give them as a tax credit. Think of that as a floor price. That's like the lowest price they can get for that CO2. But if they can make more money selling it to Continental Resources, right, depending on what the global price of oil is at the moment, rest assured, Rastetter is going to do that. I mean, if there's anything that you could predict out of Bruce Rastetter, it's going to be he'll do whatever it can to maximize his own financial return. But that's absolutely what's going to happen. And then these people who've already signed this, these easement agreements that allow Summit to build a pipeline on their land, I hope they're comfortable with the knowledge that that contract that they signed with Summit gives Summit the right to sell this pipeline once built to any third party that wants to buy the pipeline, right? So, we've already proven, Rastetter's got no problem working with Chinese-owned companies like Syngenta or Smithfield. He's currently trying to build, a pork-producing infrastructure with Smithfield right now, which is a Chinese-owned company. You don't think he'd sell this pipeline to a Chinese-owned company if he wanted to? Like, my opponent, Randy Feenstra, likes to talk about how he's protecting, Iowa from the Chinese buying our farmland. Like, the Chinese can't really buy farmland in Iowa. Iowa actually makes it really hard for any company, any corporation, or any big hedge fund, right, let alone a foreign government, to buy farmland here, right? But what Feenstra doesn't talk about is what he's doing to prevent the Chinese Communist Party from controlling our agricultural industry through corporate ownership.
Right. And food, like our food industry,
totally.
Our food supply.
I mean, Syngenta is owned by ChemChina, right, which is owned by the CCP. Smithfield is owned by a Hong Kong-based company now, a conglomerate, with murky ownership. So why would he not do the same thing? So no, like, Rastetter doesn't have the interest of the people in mind, and that CO2. I mean, that's got a lot of value, right? If he could sell that to the oil companies, or if he can use that CO2 then to go create sustainable aviation fuel, which is like the hot new opportunity that the ethanol industry is all excited about. Then, I mean, that it's great that's becoming an option. But why would the ethanol industry here in Iowa want to just give that CO2 to him for free, right? When they can do something like, create like a clean fuel like methanol right there at the plant itself, right? With and there's a process where they could do that. Methanol's got market value of around $1,200 per metric ton. Green methanol does, and all you need is a hydrogen molecule that you can peel off from water, and you mix that with CO2 and you create methanol, which can be used to power container ships. European container ships are now required to use clean fuels. There's a huge market for that. You can create sustainable aviation fuel with that CO2. Why is the ethanol industry in such a hurry to literally give this away to Bruce Rastetter?
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense to me.
So what is your thought? So we're in Mills County right now, and we're right next to Montgomery County and Pot County, and there's a big push. This is one of the few places, really, I think, in Iowa, if you drive across it, that you're not looking out at windmills.
Right.
And I know that's probably more of a county issue, but I've just thought, what is your thoughts on all these windmills and solar farms and all of this government money that's being pushed towards this clean energy is what they...
Yeah, look, in general, I'm against subsidies, right? Subsidies distort the market, right? I mean, I know, here in Pot and Mills County, you're extremely opposed to wind turbines. Up in O'Brien and County or I think it's the southern part of Ida County. Like they're they're
you
wind
got a
turbines
lot of
everywhere.
them
They're
up
everywhere.
there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like my
that was like the first place they came in. I think around Spencer, and
yeah, I think
that's the first place I saw them.
Yeah, I think the first wind turbines in Iowa were built like in the northern part of Cherokee County, up around MBV County, Buena Vista County. Right around the time I was leaving to go to the military. But that was 30 years ago, and now they're everywhere. Look, I think it's a county decision. Some counties want it, others clearly don't, and I don't think they should have to. I was just up at the lakes up in Okoboji this past weekend for the holiday weekend, and Dickinson County's fighting them tooth and nail as well. I'm not in favor of the taxpayer subsidizing any form of energy production. Honestly, I think the perfect solution would be to solve all of our energy problems would be if we just built 6 nuclear power plants. Right. 3 on each side of the state, and those can be run profitably and safely and solve all of our energy needs. And that's a better way to do it. Yeah. Even though it might take 20 or 30 years to get it done, I'd rather see that than have a bunch of wind turbines go up, because you saw what happened in Greenfield last week when a tornado comes through.
Right.
Those
well,
things don't last very long.
And if you're, like you said, you haven't been around, but there's one over by kind of close to where my parents live, and I think they were up for 7 years, and they replaced all the generators and all the blades on the turbines. And how is that energy? None of it makes sense. And when you get into subsidies, that's what you end up with. Like, does this really make sense, or are these companies just taking government money?
No, it's just, again, it's more tax credits, right? Tax credits and subsidies that are guaranteed to create resentment among the local population. In general, I'm opposed. Yeah. Unless they can be run profitably, in which case, I guess it's up to the local jurisdiction.
All right. So I think we've covered about anything else you want to cover or get out there?
Other than just saying thank you for being here. I really enjoyed this. If anybody wants to learn more about me, they can go to my campaign website at virgilforcongress.com. If they want to learn more about my opponent, they can go to a website that we created that talks about his voting record and all those instances I've told you about how badly he's sold out to people here in the last 4 years. You can go to randysvotingrecord.com, which is a website that we created at our own expense, my campaign's expense.
I'll put that in there.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And then most importantly, we just hope all of your listeners who are registered here in the 4th District will show up to vote on June 4th.
June 4th. And really, there's a lot of people that listen that aren't from here or in this district, but it's kind of like you want to drain the swamp, find out what's going on in your primaries. You want to get rid of these people that are voting the same way over and over and not doing anything about what's going on here.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of apathy out there. Right. I've seen that firsthand. Like most primaries, a lot of people think about the general election in November. They're going to come out and force to vote for whoever they want to be the president in November, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about who's going to be in their state legislature.
Right, which really makes more of the difference, I feel like.
I would argue, if we learned anything during COVID, who your county sheriff is, who your county supervisors are, who's in your school board, that matters a heck of a lot more than who the president is. Mm-hmm. That matters. That has a meaningful impact on your quality of life if things go south like they did during COVID. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's it. I think that's pretty.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
We've got an hour in, so.
Sounds good. Good stuff.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, appreciate it.